Fans have been curious about the true events and the reasons why the story's continued emotional resonance in Nashville for years. Come along as we revisit the revelations made by Roy Clark. David Stringbean Aikman's childhood. David Aikman, best known by his stage name Stringbean, was born in the hills of Jackson County, Kentucky, on June 17, 1915. His early years were influenced by his upbringing in a close-knit family, the countryside, and the times. In rural Jackson County, the majority of families subsisted on farming and manual labor. Although it was simple, life was full with difficulties. Family budgets were tight, and comfort frequently took a back seat to survival. The Ackerman family included a number of children, including David. His parents put a lot of effort into providing for their family. And he was taught at a young age that each member of the family had a responsibility. Money for pleasures and extras was scarce. It was necessary to fix any broken items rather than replace them. When the family desired amusement, they produced it themselves through storytelling, music, or get-togethers with neighbors. Because of this modest lifestyle, he developed a strong appreciation for hard effort and the little pleasures that come from community and family. David desired his own banjo as a child, but money was tight. His family just could not afford to purchase an instrument at that time. He was not, however, the type to give up quickly. Using what he could find, an old shoebox, a stick, and some strings, he constructed an instrument that resembled a banjo. Although it didn't appear to be much, he was able to practice and start mastering the sounds that captivated him. His first musical move was that handcrafted banjo. Eventually, his perseverance paid off. David's early trade demonstrated his love of music as well as the hardships that rural families frequently faced. If he wanted a real banjo, he traded 2 hens. The exchange was 100-fold worth it to him. He grew close to the instrument, which he seldom ever left his side. He practiced nonstop after that day, teaching himself tunes and rhythms until the banjo became an extension of his identity. However, before music could completely remove him from the farm, David had to endure some of the most difficult years in American history. When he was still a young man, the Great Depression struck, making it harder for already struggling families to make ends meet as banks failed and jobs vanished nationwide. The Depression was more than just news stories to folks like the Ackermans. It was neighbors losing farms they had devoted their entire lives to maintaining, people working long hours for little money, and empty cabinets. In order to provide for his family, David enlisted in the Civilian Conservation Corps, a government initiative designed to provide employment opportunities for young men during the Great Depression. He went outdoors as part of his Corps employment, helping to repair public land, plant trees, and construct roads. The world would soon witness how this tall, slender Kentucky boy transformed those early lessons into a career that would leave people singing, laughing, and remembered for decades to come. The shadows surrounding him, however, became more vivid as his tale did. Particularly, the one thing he was unable to let go of, his fear of losing money, became Stringbean. When David Aikman was in his late teens and early 20s, music had evolved beyond a pastime. It was turning into a route. In his town in Kentucky, he was already well known for being a talented banjo musician and an innate entertainer. With his banjo in hand, he was there at every local competition or event. People might like him, along with his comedy in addition to his playing. Between songs, he had a talent for throwing in a humorous joke or a light-hearted remark, and that blend of humor and music set him apart right away. David attracted the attention of an elderly musician named Asa Martin at one of these competitions. In Kentucky, Martin was a well-liked performer who frequently asked up-and-coming artists to share the stage with him. He was impressed by the tall, thin young man who made the audience laugh while playing the banjo with such love. When Martin invited David to join his band, he had the opportunity to perform at events outside of his local community. However, David had not yet adopted the stage moniker that would become his most familiar. Asa Martin forgot David's last name one evening when he brought him on stage. With a cursory glance at his slack body, Martin filled the void by referring to him as Stringbeans. The moniker stuck because of the crowd's liking. In the music industry, it was eventually abbreviated to Stringbean, which became David's permanent persona. The name became as much a part of him as his banjo. As Stringbean gained experience and a stage name, her career took off. His major break came when he joined the Bluegrass Boys, Bill Monroe's band, in the early 1940s. Bill Monroe, who was already establishing himself as the bluegrass pioneer, provided a platform for up-and-coming musicians. It was an honor and an opportunity for Stringbean to study under some of the greatest musicians of the era to join Monroe's ensemble. Grandpa Jones was one of Stringbean's most significant collaborations after he left Monroe's group and started working with other entertainers. Like Stringbean, Jones loved old-time music and humor and was also a comedic comedian and banjo player. In addition to becoming business partners, the two were close friends and performed together in shows that combined lighter comedy with songs. They were popular with the crowd and established themselves as mainstays in the country entertainment industry thanks to their onstage chemistry. Beginning to perform at Nashville's Grand Ole Opry marked the true turning point in Stringbean's career. Country music was centered at the Opry, and being able to perform there was seen as a sign of genuine achievement. Stringbean saw the Opry as more than just a venue for their performances. He cultivated the stage presence that won him national adoration there. Stringbean developed a unique performing style on the Opry stage by fusing his banjo playing with his comedic performances. Audiences never forgot the distinctive style he created. He was dressed in vintage caps, big pants pulled up with suspenders, and large shirts. He looked somewhat ridiculous in the attire, but that was the goal. People started laughing before he even said a word. In addition to his comedy and music, Stringbean's outfit contributed to his reputation as a humorous, down-to-earth banjo player who never took himself too seriously. When Stringbean met the lady who would be his lifelong companion, his life would soon change once more. Living with Estelle. David Stringbean Ackerman wed Estelle Stanfill in 1945, coinciding with the end of World War II and the nation's transition to peacetime. He had always cherished comfort and a sense of home, and their marriage became the stable core of his life. Estelle was quiet, gentle, and incredibly helpful, according to everyone who knew her. She was always proud of Stringbean and supported him throughout his career, even though she didn't want the limelight and would rather remain in the background. Quiet devotion was frequently used to characterize the couple's relationship. The fact that they were childless never appeared to weaken their relationship. Their affection for one another was evident to friends and fellow artists. It was Stringbean who brought laughter to audiences and brought music to stages. But it was Estelle who provided him with security and tranquility off stage. Everyone could see how much they loved each other despite their quiet declarations. Shortly after being married, Stringbean and Estelle found a house that reflected their characteristics to the letter. A modest log cabin in Ridgetop, Tennessee, was their choice of residence. The Ackermans took a different route than many of Stringbean's contemporaries, who utilized their wealth and notoriety to purchase more lavish homes, fancy automobiles, or other indulgences. Their cabin was comfortable, rustic, and uncomplicated. It featured a wood furnace for warmth, a garden that Estelle meticulously maintained, and hens that produced eggs. The majority of their meals were prepared from scratch, frequently using products they had personally produced or reared. Some fans may have been taken aback by this kind of life after seeing Stringbean perform on the iconic television program Hee Haw or on stage every week at the Grand Ole Opry. Outsiders might have thought it was strange that a well-known performer lived such a modest life. But that felt like the only route to Stringbean and Estelle. They felt successful without the need for ostentatious items. Their contentment stemmed from their modest lifestyle, gardening, hunting, fishing, and spending peaceful time together after the stage's music and laughing had ended. Stringbean had a strong mistrust of banks, which contributed to their modest lifestyle. This mistrust dates back to his early years during the Great Depression. When he was younger, he seen families lose all of their savings in a single day when banks shut down. He never forgot the growing sense of powerlessness and terror during those years. And it influenced his lifelong financial management. Despite his success and consistent income from music, he refused to keep his money in banks. Stringbean decided to hold on to his earnings instead. He was always carrying cash, and he discovered odd hiding spots to hide his banknotes at home. He may have hidden cash in the chimney, according to some. There were others who thought it was concealed under loose bricks in the walls or beneath the floorboard. The extent of his concealment was never known, but rumors circulated among the community. Speculation started to circulate that Stringbean might be hiding thousands of dollars in that tiny home. Although their home life appeared to be tranquil, their behaviors, particularly the concealed money, would eventually draw unwanted attention. The worst people would soon be the ones attracting that attention. The deadly night. For the majority of those who knew David Stringbean Ackerman, Saturday, November 10, 1973, started out like any other. This evening followed Stringbean's pattern, which he rarely deviated from. Every week, Johnny and Estelle were ready to travel to Nashville, where he was supposed to play at the Grand Ole Opry. That night, Stringbean was feeling upbeat at the Opry. He amused the audience as usual, telling his jokes and playing his banjo. The night didn't seem out of the ordinary, according to what other artists later recounted. Estelle accompanied him as usual. She kept to herself backstage. She kept her focus on her husband while politely conversing with other people. For Stringbean, having her at his side was just a normal aspect of their shared existence. After the Opry concluded, Stringbean proceeded as normal. He went home to his cabin in Ridgetop, Tennessee, with Estelle after leaving the show. By all accounts, nothing seemed unusual during the typical journey. It appeared to the outside world to be just another Saturday evening. Although Stringbean was entertaining listeners with his music, turmoil was already brewing at home. John and Marvin Brown, two cousins with a history of thievery and small-time criminal activity, had broken into the Ackerman cabin earlier that night. They had grown up restless and impoverished, frequently in legal problems, and had recently gotten increasingly careless. The Browns had heard the same stories that had been going about for years, that Stringbean was suspicious of banks and kept a lot of money stashed away in his home. Rumor had it that thousands of cash could be hidden behind the walls, beneath his floors, or in his chimney. The Browns interpreted these speculations as a chance. They broke inside the cabin that November evening and waited. They had an easy strategy. Terrify Stringbean, ambush him when he got home, and steal any cash they might discover. They were certain that the humble small house held a secret riches. After the Opry, it was late, almost midnight, when Stringbean and Estelle got home. Not knowing that the cabin was dangerous, they parked and approached it. Stringbean entered initially. Almost at once the Browns were in front of him. John Brown is said to have fired the initial shot, striking Stringbean close to the doorway. He fell to the ground and died nearly immediately. Terrified, Estelle fled the cabin and headed for the car in the hopes of getting away or getting assistance. However, she didn't get very far. After pursuing her, Marvin Brown shot her outside close to the car. A violent outburst shattered the couple's peaceful existence in a matter of minutes. Desperate to uncover the money they thought was concealed within, the Browns investigated the cabin. They discovered significantly less than they had anticipated, though. Even though they thought there were thousands of dollars hidden away, very little money was found. No sign of the rest of the supposed wealth was found. Grandpa Jones, another Opry star and Stringbean's close buddy, showed up to the cottage the following morning. They were going hunting together, which was something they did frequently. Jones anticipated finding Stringbean prepared with his equipment when he pulled up to the house. He was instead confronted with a scene that would follow him around for the rest of his life. Jones observed Estelle's body close to the automobile. In disbelief, he ran to the house and found Stringbean laying just outside the door. When he realized what had happened, he went right away to seek assistance. He would later say that the incident was among the worst experiences he had ever had. Even though he survived for a long time, Grandpa Jones will always remember discovering his close companions in such a terrible state. The killing's swiftly spreading news rocked Nashville and the country music industry as a whole. It left neighbors, other artists, and fans in disbelief. It was hard to believe this modest, good-hearted couple could be interpreted so cruelly. In the near future, the pursuit of justice would start, revealing information that startled friends and admirers alike. Nashville was rocked by the search for the murderers and the horrifying killings of Stringbean and Estelle Ackerman. Fans and friends wept, while neighbors muttered about who might have committed such a heinous crime. Suspicion quickly swirled, and the trail ultimately led to two cousins, John and Marvin Brown, who were already known to the police. Talk was rife in the small village of Ridgetop in the days after the killings. The long-standing rumors regarding Stringbean's hidden money were well known, and many immediately surmised that robbery had been the motivation. John and Marvin Brown's abrupt actions, however, were what initially attracted significant attention. People were suspicious of both guys because of their criminal histories, which primarily involved theft. Their expenditures, however, were the most notable aspect. Residents observed that the Browns appeared to have more money than normal shortly after the killings. They flaunted their money, talked too freely, and purchased items they ordinarily couldn't afford. This immediately caught the attention of everyone in a tiny community where even minor changes are noted. Some of their acquaintances discreetly reported their worries to the police. Investigators were led to assume that the cousins might be involved in the crime because of their flamboyant conduct and casual conversation. The Browns were being observed by the police. Residents who had observed the abrupt shift in their routines were asked to provide statements. Some people claimed to have heard the men talk insensitively about money or string beans. Others noted how apprehensive they appeared when the murders were brought up. Additionally, investigators looked for tangible proof. Although the account of what transpired within the cabin had already been largely revealed by the crime scene, the crucial element was the clear connection to the Browns. Over time, detectives collected enough information to make a compelling case. There were some stolen goods in the Browns' possession that could be linked to the Ackerman residence. Together with their extraordinary shopping spree and strange mobility timetable, the evidence against them became stronger every day. The cops soon had the assurance that they had their men. A little measure of relief was provided to a neighborhood still reeling from the brutal deaths of two cherished neighbors when both cousins were taken into custody within weeks of the killings. This was just the start of the arrests. In addition to the local community, the whole country music industry took a keen interest in the trial that ensued. The court served as the venue for the justice that Stringbean and Estelle's fans demanded. Testimonies came from a variety of sources. Grandpa Jones, the person who had found the bodies, spoke movingly about the morning he arrived at the site. The chronology of Stringbean's last hours was established with the assistance of other artists from the Opry who discussed his personality and routine. The information acquired by investigators was presented, including the Browns' questionable expenditures and their possession of stolen goods. The court ultimately imposed severe penalties. In order to ensure that he would never be allowed to go free again, the shooter, John Brown, was sentenced to 198 years in jail. Despite being given a shorter term, Marvin Brown was nonetheless imprisoned for the remainder of his life. He was never released from prison and died there later. Whatever happened to Stringbean's secret money, the mystery of the hidden riches, continually plagued everyone even after the murderers were apprehended. The murders of David Stringbean Aikman and his wife Estelle in 1973 horrified Nashville and the country music community. Another side of the narrative, however, started to emerge in the days and years that followed. An enigma surrounding funds concealed within the Ackerman cabin. The rumors that had been circulating for years turned out to have a startling amount of truth to them. Upon searching the Ackerman cabin following the killings, detectives discovered cash hidden in odd locations. There were small bundles of money concealed in a pair of boots. The cabin's walls were partially sealed and the chimney was hidden away. The total amount of the hidden funds by the time it was all said and done was about $20,000, which was a substantial sum for someone living so simply in the early 1970s. For those who were familiar with Stringbean, this revelation was not entirely unexpected. During the Great Depression, when banks failed and many families lost everything, he had lived. Because of the event, he has always mistrusted financial institutions. His preference was to store his earnings in a visible and tactile location. He believed it was safer to conceal money in his house than to entrust it to others. People were still taken aback by the precise quantity. All his life, Stringbean had been frugal with his finances. Nobody anticipated that he was secretly holding thousands of dollars, even though he earned a respectable life from music and television. As soon as the initial money hoard was discovered, rumors began to circulate. Both admirers and neighbors started to question how much more Stringbean might have concealed. He had hidden tens of thousands of dollars more, according to some. According to others, the cabin was essentially a vault with hidden passageways just waiting to be discovered. The Ackerman house became a subject of curiosity as a result of these rumors. There were rumors of intruders and treasure seekers breaking onto the property at night long after the killings. Hoped to discover yet another secret package. After the incident, officials guarded the cabin, but curiosity about the alleged money remained. Just as unforgettable as Stringbean's comedy and music, the story of his hidden wealth became part of his folklore. A mystery that persisted for decades was the tale of a man who dispersed cash throughout his cabin because he was so suspicious of banks. The rumors then came to pass again more than 2 decades later. While renovating the cabin in 1996, workmen discovered yet another secret cache. Around $20,000 more in cash was discovered behind a wall that had been blocked off for decades. But by that time, the bills had lost all of their value. They had been destroyed by moist circumstances and time. The coin was worthless, and the paper was rotten. It was now merely a curiosity, tangible evidence of Stringbean's habits, and what had once been a tiny fortune. But now worthless in terms of money. This second finding just led to additional conjecture. How much more could be buried in the cabin or the surrounding acreage if money has been buried thus deeply in the walls? Even though there have never been any further reports of discovery, the possibility of hidden caches has never completely vanished. Another conflict, the issue of who would inherit Stringbean's belongings, was equal to the mystery of his secret wealth. Estelle and Stringbean didn't have kids, and no will was discovered following their passing. Consequently, the estate was left to be resolved in court. Family members on both sides filed claims, and the court fights continued. Eventually, Estelle's family was granted the majority of the land and possessions. However, the conflicts led to conflict, and the unearthed money just made things more difficult. Every new discovery prompted inquiries about who was entitled to it and who would gain the most in the long run. A large portion of Stringbean's estate was ultimately divided by the courts. But the procedure was clouded by the inquiries regarding his secret fortune. His decision to conceal money rather than entrust it to banks had a profound impact on his day-to-day existence and left a legacy of conflict and mystery following his passing. Fans continued to recall what made Stringbean unique despite the mystery behind its success. He brought laughter and song to the world. The gloomy fallout. The killings of Stringbean and Estelle Aikman did not end quietly, even decades later. The tragedy remained in the public consciousness due to new events, unexpected actions, and unanswered questions. When one of the murderers, John Brown, was freed from jail in 2014, it was one of the most startling events. John Brown was sentenced to make sure he would never be allowed to walk free again after his conviction in the 1970s. He'd been sentenced to 198 years in jail. A phrase that made the gravity of his offense clear. For a lot of individuals, the sentence was somewhat consoling. The man who pulled the trigger would be imprisoned for the rest of his life. But word of John Brown's parole was released in 2014, over 40 years after the killings. According to parole officials, he was no longer a menace to society at the age of 64. Outrage was triggered by the decision. Fans of country music, Stringbean's friends, and Estelle's relatives expressed their dissatisfaction. They believed that the severity of the crime could never be made up for by time spent behind bars. Brown's release was viewed by many as an insult to the couple's memory and to the town, which had never really recovered from the loss. To exacerbate the situation, Brown's own statements following his release did little to soothe tensions. In interviews and statements, he occasionally expressed contrition but other times came across as cold and unrepentant. His lack of genuine regret for his actions was perceived by many, which only made the parole decision more offensive. Additionally, the introduction of John Brown refocused long-standing questions that had never received satisfactory answers. John and Marvin Brown's actions alone were one of the greatest mysteries. The possibility of a third accomplice has long been speculated by certain residents. It was thought that another person had either assisted in the crime's planning or had been at the cabin that evening. Although the suspicion persisted, nothing was ever confirmed. How the Browns knew Stringbean's schedule so well was another unsolved puzzle. He had a regular schedule. On Saturday nights, he would play at the Opry before going home. Did the Browns, however, have a tip from someone or just exploit a well-known habit? Some conjectured that a neighbor or an Opry insider might have supplied information, but there was never any proof to back up that theory. The unsolved questions eventually led to a plethora of ideas and speculations. Some thought the Browns had inside information from someone close to Stringbean, while others were certain they had acted on their own and had only made a correct estimate about his itinerary. Following the 1996 finding of an additional $20,000 in the cabin walls, speculation about the buried money further intensified. More than 20 years later, if money was still being found, who was to say there wasn't more? This led to conjecture that either additional undetected money was still out there or that the Browns had stolen more than anyone had thought. These questions remain unanswered to this day. Among fans, historians, and locals who recall the events, theories are still being shared. For many, part of what keeps the story interesting is the mystery. Even though it is still painful to remember the catastrophe itself. To ensure you don't miss what comes next, please remember to hit the notification bell, like this video, and subscribe to the channel if you liked it.